Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the monthly roundtable discussion of the Council for Strategic Affairs. My name is Dr. Adityanjee, and I am the President of Council for Strategic Affairs. Today is Saturday, September 27th, 2025, and we are going to have a roundtable discussion on SCO, BRICS, G-20, the newly emerging global order. So let me try to share my PowerPoint and see how we go about this. We have three distinguished panelists. One of them is Professor David Soong. We also have Professor Kondapalli, who is professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University.
Adityanjee, your file explorer is being shared, not the presentation.
I realize that I'm trying to deal with this technical glitch. So just give me a minute.
It's very difficult. It happens many times, and hopefully you'll be able to sort it out soon. But
yeah, let me just do this. Otherwise, we'll go without the PowerPoint. That's not a problem.
can one of our team members present it separately? Okay, it's starting.
Okay, here it is now. So you see our flyer now. This was the flyer. I talked about three of the participants. Our fourth panelist has some family emergency, so she would not be able to join. A little bit about our organization. Council imparts education in the field of international relations. It fosters discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. We encourage strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. Council condemns terrorism, all its forms worldwide. We aim to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. Council encourages publication of articles on geopolitics. CSA is registered as a 501c3 organization with the IRS in the US. Our audience members who are based in US, we expect them to help us by donating and supporting CSA. We do a monthly roundtable discussion as we are doing now. There's a monthly guest lecture also by a domain expert. We also have a feature called Strategically Speaking with Dr. Adityanjee. We had the 40th episode today with an interview with General Atta Hussain. We organize symposia, meetings, and conferences. We have a fellowship training program in strategic studies, and currently we have two fellows, Harsh Sinha and Khushi Mishra. Again, audience based in United States and North America, please donate and support CSA. So the topic is CSO, BRICS, G20, and the emerging global order. The post-World War II Washington Consensus and Bretton Woods institutions are facing headwinds in the first quarter of 21st century. New global institutions have emerged in the last 25 years that reflect fluidity, multipolarity, multi-alignment, and shift of global power to the East. Having said that, there is some resistance to this newly emerging global order from the Western alliance led by the United States. How do we manage this fluid geopolitical and geoeconomic scenario without descending into chaos and war is a serious challenge to the international community. Hopefully, this roundtable discussion will give us some leads for the future to enhance global cooperation and minimize conflict in years to come. So these are the pictures of our panelists. Of course, Kamakshi will not be able to join us. This is Professor David Soong. He is Professor of Linguistics in China. This is Ambassador Gustavo Westmann from Brazil. He is the official trade representative of Brazilian government. And finally, we have Professor Kondapalli from JNU in Delhi, India. A few rules of engagement for our audience. Kindly keep yourself muted to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please do not try to interrupt our esteemed speakers. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to pose questions. No anonymous questioners, please. All the questions are moderated through the chat room. Please ask very precise and specific questions. Don't send lengthy monologue in the form of a question. This program is being recorded and is being live streamed on our YouTube channel. It will be available on our website. Again, repetition that we are a 501c3 organization. We hope that you will support us by financially donating and supporting and subscribing to our YouTube channel. So without further ado, I will start inviting our panelists, esteemed panelists. Instead of 4, we have 3 panelists today. Each panelist will make an opening statement lasting for 5 minutes, and that would be followed by a question and answer session that is moderated. I will invite, first of all, Ambassador Gustavo Westmann to make his opening statement. Sir, please take the floor and your opening statement. Kindly unmute yourself.
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. What a great pleasure, Dr. Adityanjee, once again to be here. I can see Ambassador Kapoor, Professor David Soong, Professor Kondapalli, very honored to be here with you all. It's a very complex subject we're discussing this week, right, Doctor? And I believe we cannot discuss any of these issues without contextualizing it in a broader sense. I'm just coming back from New York. I'm actually connecting. I just arrived from New York and I'm going to Germany. I was with President Lula during the General Assembly. I don't know if you have the chance and the opportunity to watch Lula's speech, Antonio Guterres' speech, the General Secretary, especially Donald Trump's speech. I don't know whether you had the chance to watch these speeches and analyze them. And one of the things that became clear is we're living a crisis of the multilateral system, that's for sure, and we need reforms. What you can tell is that this reform process, we really need to give more voice to the Global South, and that has already become clear. I believe we are all in this round table on the same page in this sense, but a lot has to be done, and the counter forces are very powerful. So from one hand, we need to promote structural reforms. From the other hand, we have some, let's say, former great powers still insisting on keeping the situation as it is, and it used to be historically. Give me just 1 second. That was quite interesting to be there and to see this from the inside, okay? To which directions are we going to? And that's where I believe it fits when we talk about the SCO, BRICS, G-20, which directions are these groups, are these plurilateral movements leading us, right? The SCO has called the attention of the world recently due to its meetings, but it caused some polemics also. So what kind of organization, and I'm provoking now Professor Soong here, are we talking about a China Plus movement? Is that what we want? I don't know. I don't have the answers. I'm just provoking, all right? Are we talking about strictly commercial and geopolitical, strategic, and military groups? Or are we still willing to discuss some civilizatory values of humanity? I don't know, again, just playing with these cards. So those are some things that came up, at least in Brazil, and it's quite interesting because in Brazil, SCOs is still quite a different reality. And that's very interesting. While for you in Asia, it's like the thing of the moment, right? That's where every TV channel is looking at. To us, it's like the leaders met, you know, and it's interesting also how communication and how these things still work. BRICS, we've discussed a lot in our last session. And I think BRICS has been offering solutions, but we're still way far from presenting concrete responses. But BRICS is on the right track, I would say. We have very high expectations on India now. Actually, in New York, we had some BRICS meetings, very high level meetings, already led by India, who's going to be the next chair. And it was quite surprising in terms of ambition. Turning ambition into action will be the challenge to come. And last but not least, G20. G20, I have been very involved with G20, and I've been talking a lot with the South Africans. And what we're seeing is a kind of sabotage process from the US, right? We're seeing the US effectively not engaging, and not only not engaging, but trying to avoid or to block some of the group decisions, which leads to another question. If the US is willing to block things, is it better they just stay out and let things happen or not? Once again, I don't have the answer, but those are some of the polemics we've been discussing. For example, Brazil is hosting COP, the Conference on Climate Change, this year. So if the US is going to join the meetings to block consensus, just don't go. Maybe it's better this way. So these are things that are on the radar. We've been discussing that a lot. I believe you highlighted three, SCO, BRICS, and G20, three of the most relevant plurilateral mechanisms in the current days, yet to be seen their powerful and their strength in these rearrangement of global forces. But the recent speeches at the UNGA, the UN General Assembly, were a sign of what to expect in the next years. We know it's not going to be easy, but we have to be optimistic because I really believe there's plenty of room for us from the Global South to have a more active role in building or reforming the global order. I'll stop here for now. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much indeed, Ambassador Gustavo Westmann, for your observations and your questions about effectiveness of some of these newly emerging organizations, their global relevance, and some pushback and resistance from the United States. I'm very happy to say that our fourth panelist, Ms. Kamakshi Wason, has been able to join after all. She's a representative of global youth. She indulges in track to diplomacy everywhere. She's the CEO of the Tillottama Foundation. So it is my honor and pleasure to invite Ms. Kamakshi Wason to give her opening statement from a youth perspective, from maybe Gen Z perspective, whatever one may call, but from a youthful perspective, let's hear Kamakshi Wason. Kindly unmute yourself, Kamakshi.
Hello, Dr. Adityanjee. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and to be here among the distinguished panelists. I want to share my perspective on the tectonic shifts unfolding in the architecture of the world order. Shifts, I feel, that signal a transition from a unipolar to a truly multipolar world. Platforms like the SCO, BRICS, and G20, they have become dynamic arenas where I feel power is not only negotiated, but reimagined. It also reflects assertiveness of the global south and also recalibrated alliances. Let me begin with the SCO. So the 25th SCO summit held this year in Tianjin. It was far more than a routine multilateral meeting. It illuminated the complex interplay of great power ambitions and regional aspirations. India used this platform judicially to emphasize what I call its three-pillar approach: security, connectivity, and opportunity. When we talk about security, India delivered an unambiguous message: zero tolerance for terrorism, with direct references to state-sponsored cross-border terrorism, highlighting the Pahalgam attack. This clear assertion of India's evolving role as a security provider within the Eurasia region, it asserts norms that no territorial sovereignty should be violated under any pretext. At the same time, if I talk about the necessity, India asserted the necessity for connectivity projects to uphold sovereignty and reject coercion. Unlike China's Belt and Road Initiative, which often faces criticism for strategic overreach, our infrastructure diplomacy has seen in its investments in the Chabahar port and the INSTC. By offering a contrasting vision, one can be grounded in mutual respect, multilateralism, and also long-term economic sustainability. Additionally, I would like to add that India proposed a civilizational dialogue forum in order to foster people-to-people connections, signaling a soft power complement to its harsh strategic posture. But navigating the SCO is no walk in the park. I feel India should delicately manage its engagement with China's expansive ambitions and also Pakistan's obstructive policies, all while leveraging its strategic partnership with Russia to maintain a balance of the influence. Because I feel Russia acts as a diplomatic bridge, revitalizing informal trilateral dialogue, channels between India, Russia, and China, the RIC, I think, which helps India to avoid isolation and engage China multilaterally despite persistent border tensions. Turning to India's engagement with the Central Asia, we have seen a pragmatic and strategic decalibration taking shape. The fourth India-Central Asia dialogue, which happened in June this year, it reaffirmed the shared priorities: security cooperation, economic development, climate action was also discussed, and also Afghanistan's inclusive governance. India's Connect Central Asia policy, it embodies this vision and enabling a pivot from ad hoc bilateral ties to a structured multilateral partnership, which secured through infrastructure projects and trade corridors like I previously mentioned, Chabahar and INSTC. It also, in a way, bolstered the by energy and mineral cooperation. I feel this outreach is not just about economic gains, it is a strategic counterbalance to China's dominant presence, while also reinforcing India's regional leadership, ambitions, and also contributing to the Eurasian stability. Now, after SCO, I would like to talk about BRICS. I feel BRICS in 2025, it has took a leap that cannot be understated. The bloc expanded to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, swelling its demographic and economic heft to cover 45% of the global population and roughly 35% of the global GDP. I feel this transformation, it symbolizes a deeper geopolitical shift. Gone is the time when BRICS was just a counterweight to Western economic dominance. And I feel today it is a diversified, complex coalition where countries like India and Brazil, they pursue a balanced, pragmatic economic cooperation and institutional reforms, while we have China and Russia occasionally pushing for a more confrontational posture towards the West. India's approach here also exemplifies the selective engagement, embracing financial diversification, such as rupee-based trade, the settlements, digital cooperation, even as it maintains robust economic ties with the Western economies. Lastly, I just want to reflect on the India's G20 moment in 2023, which we chaired, which was both a symbolic and substantive assertion of its rising global stature. When we hosted G20 in New Delhi, we engineered the historic permanent inclusion of the African Union, in which we tried to signal a long overdue expansion of representation for the global South in global governance, while also showcasing its diplomatic finesse in our diplomatic finesse in bridging divides across the world's biggest economic powers. We had initiatives like the Global Biofuels Alliance and the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, in which I think our own vision was to not only accelerate the green energy transition, but also to reshape global supply chains and connectivity with a focus on inclusiveness and sustainability. With all this, I want to talk about the strategic autonomy and the multi-alignment we look after. We engage with the US, European Union, and Russia. Though there are tensions with the US now, but I feel while refusing to the pigeonholed into any rigid alliance structure, we see it as a nimble diplomacy, which is grounded in developmental pragmatism, by recognizing that in today's fluid global order, flexibility and issue-based coalitions trump fixed blocks. And this, I feel the leadership for the 21st century, what we see as is ambitious, also modest, but firm yet open. So we are ready to negotiate also, but we are also firm on our decisions. We also propose frameworks. And I think these platforms, these multilateral platforms, SCO, BRICS, G20, they're not just simply forums for dialogue. I feel they also provide a new global balance where India, we play a crucial pragmatic role, where we balance, we have a vision, and we also have creativity. The emerging global order, I feel, will be less about dominance and more about cooperation, because we have crafted it through fact-based, inclusive diplomacy, which also reflects the world as it is truly today, multipolar and interconnected. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Kamakshi Wason, for joining us. And you gave very lucid, very comprehensive opening statement touching all the issues. And I hope that you can continue to stay on for the discussion part of it. Now it's my honor and pleasure to invite Professor David Soong, who is joining us from Beijing, China. Professor Soong, kindly take the platform. And please unmute yourself, sir.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. Hello from China. Good evening from China to distinguished experts and professors. It's really my great honor to join this forum on SCO, BRICS, and the G20, newly emerging global order. Well, today I will talk about this from my own perspective as a Chinese national. And I think that these three works are not simply international gatherings. They are windows into how the international order is evolving and how countries like China, as well as our partners, can shape a future that is more balanced, inclusive, and development-oriented. As the two most populous countries and neighbors, China and India will play a big role in the world economic and political values if they join hands, putting away their disputes. Well, let me begin with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The SCO was originally created to address security challenges in Eurasia, but its significance has steadily expanded. We know that just last month, in September 2025, China hosted the SCO Summit in Tianjin, a resounding success that it produced a 10-year development strategy. This plan emphasized expanded use of national currencies for trade, cooperation on digital infrastructure, renewable energy, and even a proposed multilateral currency swap fund to shield us from financial risks. For China, the SCO is about maintaining stability in our neighborhood, countering terrorism and extremism, and creating a secure environment for development. For other members, it offers reassurance that regional affairs can be managed through dialogue and equality without excessive reliance on outside powers like the Western powers or the American powers. In this sense, the SCO embodies a vision of regional cooperation rooted in mutual respect and practical benefits for all the members. But turning to BRICS, this grouping has become a powerful collective voice for emerging economies. With the expansion into BRICS Plus, it now spans continents and the ideologies reflecting the aspirations of the global South or the developing countries. At the BRICS summit earlier this month, President Xi Jinping proposed new initiatives to strengthen solidarity in trade, innovation, and people-to-people exchange. For China, BRICS is an opportunity to promote a reform of international governance structures that have too often reflected the priorities of only a few advanced countries. For other members, it creates opportunities to diversify partnerships, share development experiences, and jointly protect their interests in global negotiations. More broadly, BRICS shows that emerging economies can stand together to advance equitable development and inclusive globalization, especially China and India. They will really play a big role in the world stage if they join hands, putting away their differences and disputes. Well, the G20, meanwhile, provides the broadest platform, bringing together both advanced and emerging economies and representing around 85% of the global GDP. Its inclusiveness gives it unique weight in tackling challenges such as financial stability, climate change, food security, and digital transformation. All these are needed in developing countries in global South. Looking ahead to the 2025 summit in Johannesburg, under the theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, actually China is ready to play a constructive role. Our proposals on inclusive governance, cooperation in artificial intelligence, and support for the global South all reflect a vision of shared prosperity. For other members, the G20 is a chance to build a consensus across divides and ensure that globalization can be managed in ways that benefit more people. Importantly, it remains one of the few spaces where countries with different political systems and development models meet as equals, which reflects the emerging reality of a multipolar world. And I think this is proposed by both China and India and also other BRICS members. But now the question before us is whether these platforms will truly form the backbone of a newly emerging global order. Well, the answer, I believe, is both yes and not yet. On the one hand, the SCO, BRICS, and the G20 already demonstrated how multipolarity is moving from theory to practice. They give developing economies a stronger voice. They create alternatives for growth and security. And they provide mechanisms for dialogue even amid tension. On the other hand, they are not fully unified or institutionalized, and their effectiveness will ultimately depend on whether members can align national priorities with collective goals. These frameworks will not replace existing institutions overnight, nor should they. Instead, they complement and gradually reshape the system from within, pushing it toward greater fairness, inclusiveness, and balance. Well, if they can maintain momentum and depend cooperation, then together they will indeed become pillars of the new global order in the decades ahead. Well, of course, these changes bring both opportunities and challenges. Multipolarity can sometimes produce competition and fragmentation, but the task before us is not to retreat into rival blocks, but to build bridges among them. The SCO teaches us that regional stability and development can be pursued side by side by all the countries. BRICS show that the emerging economies can create new opportunities for global South, and the G20 reminds us that global dialogue remains possible even in a time of tension. In summary, the newly emerging global order is still in information. Its direction will depend on how we manage these platforms and how we balance national interests with collective interests. As an ordinary Chinese person, I believe China benefits from this process, but so too does the wider world. The SCO, BRICS, and G20 are not competing alternatives, but complementary pillars of a more inclusive international system. Our responsibility is to guide this transformation toward cooperation rather than confrontation, and toward progress rather than division, so that the future we build is fairer, greener, and more sustainable for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Soong, for a very comprehensive presentation. And people were able to see your PowerPoint because I had access to it and I had displayed it. Now it's my pleasure and honor to invite Professor Kondapalli from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. Professor Kondapalli has been on our platform several times before, so welcome, sir, again. Your opening statement.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good evening to all the participants. The title is SCO, BRICS, G20 and the newly emerging global order. I think we are still in the birth pangs of a newly emerging world order. Since we are mentioning about the world order, I think we need to go back to the previous world order. Roughly since the Westphalian Treaty, 1648, we entered into national jurisdictions, latitude, longitude as the basis for the formation of nation states. And in the post-colonial world, we have a number of nations emerging as part of that Westphalia. In fact, today the United Nations Charter has been cited by many countries as the basis for the international order. The second stage of that world order is the age of revolutions, French Revolution, so on and so forth. That has created a new buzz in terms of liberty, equality, fraternity, and so on. Then we had the two world wars. Between the interregnum, we have seen a massive shift towards idealism in Roosevelt's world order. And 1945, we have had the Cold War between the then Soviet Union and the United States. Cold War created a lot of problems for space for many countries. India articulated the non-aligned movement. China articulated the third world concept during that point of time. Now we are in the post-Cold War, 1991, after the Soviet disintegration. We also call this as post-9/11 world order to underline the factor of terrorism in international relations. The emerging global order, the newly emerging global order, the subtitle for our conversation, has not come about yet, and it is in a flux. There are so many developments like the technological revolutions, disruptions, AI and other things have created in the last few years. I think this we need to keep in mind in the newly emerging world order. And secondly, the disruptions caused by the COVID pandemic. The pandemic has created supply chain disruptions and others, which we are still trying to struggle to restore the supply chains. So that is one area where I think in terms of the economic issues, there is the so broadly, these are the things that has created the areas for a newly emerging global order. However, having said this, there is a lot of, as other speakers have also mentioned, there is a dearth of global governance in the existing multilateral institutions like the United Nations. We just saw the speeches by leaders and the necessity for the global South countries, the developing countries, on effective multilateralism. We have seen as a part of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the emergence of food, fuel, fertilizer problem for the global South countries. This is an existential problem that has not yet been resolved. And there are a lot of controversies on the energy related matter between US, Russia, European Union, and other countries. So the energy security order has not yet been fixed, and it is actually creating a lot of problem for the global South countries. So that needs to be urgently addressed in this. There is still Western dominated energy companies which demand a lot of traction, and this has created a huge problem during the global financial crisis when the energy was $140 per barrel. And today it is slightly above the global historical averages, of global historical averages being 60, 70, but now it is around $80 and above per barrel, which is actually pinching a lot of developing countries in terms of their modernization, industrialization, and others. The second issue the global South is concerned is the climate change, especially in terms of finance. It is not clear the Paris meeting 2015 has created any alternative mechanisms, especially renewable sources of energy. And this is also a pressing issue for the global South. The fact that today the climate change issues have not been addressed or being rolled back in terms of the finance, etc., is creating a lot of problems. The third is digital and technological revolutions. India had tried the DPI, digital public infrastructure, and it is quite receptive in the global South countries and others. So India is trying to provide an alternative here on the DPI. Also on the solar alliances as far as the climate change issues are concerned, and also the CDRI, disaster relief related matters. India, in fact, has been using hard power for the disaster relief related matters. Tsunami is one example, but also other examples where whenever there is an earthquake, including in Turkey, when there's an earthquake, India had immediately sent relief operations, etc. So this is one India is trying to show in these. In this context, the G20, of course, is the major institution, as Dr. Soong mentioned, about the need for addressing financial crises and others. But I would like to suggest the debt-related issues are also a major concern here. For example, nearly 24 African countries are in debt, and G20 is supposed to look after those issues that have not been addressed. So even the new multilateral institutions need to be refurbished, not just the UN and others, but also these ones. SCO is mainly focused on Eurasia, and it acquires a regional tinge, and it is confined to energy, counterterrorism, multipolarity, and economic and trade, infrastructure, and others. That needs to be expanded. As the Prime Minister Narendra Modi mentioned in Tianjin meeting, it has to go beyond the SCO governments in order to address issues related to youth empowerment. It has to also address the issues of digital connectivity and civil society requirements. SCO is seen as mostly authoritarian regimes, and there is a need for looking at the requirements of the people as such. And I think India made a very strong statement in regard to going beyond the governments and addressing issues that are part of the recent dynamic. So I want to wind up this preliminary discussion by saying Voice of Global South is a requirement, and India has mobilized nearly 130 countries in bringing in climate change on food, fuel, fertilizer, existential issues, not in abstract terms, but actually what is required for the developing countries. And also the digital public initiative, as well as infrastructure, as well as CDRI and others. It's interesting that India is speaking about civilizational requirements also from these multilateral institutions, especially in terms of yoga, diaspora diplomacy, and also Buddhism. It has been raised in the Indian discussions. So I think there are ways here that are that can be taken as a way forward. And let me thank the organizers for inviting me.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Kondapalli, for a very comprehensive, starting with the history of Westphalian nations to current context and total dynamism over a period of time historically and what challenges we face. Really pleased to hear your very wise thoughts and advice to the international fraternity. Now we have all the opening statements, so we will go for question and answer sessions. Before I start taking question and answers from the chat room, I have a question of my own, and I'll start with actually Ambassador Gustavo Westmann. Ambassador Westmann, you had mentioned pushback from United States in G20, which is a fact. But there's also a pushback in gradual reform of the existing institutions, especially United Nations Security Council. What are your comments on that particular issue? Kindly unmute yourself, sir. You are muted. Kindly unmute yourself.
Well, doctor, that's a tough one, and I think we are still seeing what's going to happen and how things are going to evolve, right? I think the current administration in the US, it's not even a year, and so many question marks to which direction things are going, how effectively influential these new logics we're going to change the world or not. I believe it's already changing, but a lot of open questions. Regarding to the reform of the UN, something that I witnessed just this week and particularly called my attention. I had a few meetings with President Lula, and in one of these meetings we were with the General Secretary, Antonio Guterres, exactly discussing, it was a brief discussion, of course, but the reform of the UN. I don't know if you have the chance to see But just before last Friday, exactly slightly more than a week ago, the General Secretariat announced a plan of reform in the UN, which is extremely ambitious in terms of deep reforming. And the idea is we don't have resources anymore. So how can you survive without resources? And the project includes fusing lots of agencies. It goes like from reducing the words in the documents, the words count in the documents of the UN, to merging agencies and reducing staff and changing the headquarters of the agencies to African nations or to other nations where the costs of living are lower. And what we saw is that the US, so what's the reaction from the US regarding it? And we saw very ambiguous reactions, because from one hand, they were accusing the General Secretary of reducing the UN. From the other hand, they're still cutting resources from the UN. So I think reforms have to be done. And I believe that everybody agrees with that. We can no longer keep the UN in its 80s years old, right? We cannot keep it the same way. It's no longer being able to address the challenges we are facing. And in order to do so, we need all the P5 members plus the entire group of countries to move forward. I believe what we're going to see in the next years is an unavoidable process of reform of the structure of General Assembly, but we also going to see, it's going to be unavoidable, that we're going to see a reform of the Security Council by the increase of its permanent and non-permanent members. It's no longer avoidable. We're going to have to do that. If it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 10 years, I don't know. But I believe it's going to happen. And it's not the US that's going to hold that, because the world has been changing and the US is no longer the unipolar country in the world that has the power to decide over everything. Those are my initial thoughts. Of course, that's a conversation we could have for hours, but let's see. We have to keep monitoring these things.
Thank you, Ambassador Gustavo Westmann. My next question goes to Professor David Soong. Professor David Soong, Professor Kondapalli mentioned about need for debt forgiveness and debt restructuring, especially for 24 African countries, and the existing institutions have not actually stepped up to the plate. Now, we do know that a number of these African countries accrue debt to China under BRI. Will China be willing to forgive the debt of African countries as well as other developing countries that they owe to China under various projects of BRI? Mind you, BRI has been also called a debt trap. So as a Chinese citizen, what is your view on China's debt forgiving?
I remember that you asked me this question
Yes.
several months ago. The same question, right? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I still remember that you asked me this question several months ago, and I answered you this question. I have to say that actually China has already, forgiven a big sum of money for African countries. If my memory serves me right, I should say that China has already forgiven the debt of 17 African countries. So, well, I think this depends on the economy of China and also the intention of the Chinese leadership, and also the relationship between African countries and China. And I also have to say that China is not, economically developed. China is also still a developing country, just like African countries. China is only a little bit better than African countries. Well, we have a big population. That is why our economy is a little bigger than those African countries. Well, let me be very direct to you guys. Well, even up to now, there are no indications or announcements as of September 2025 that China plans to forgive the debts owed by 24 specific African countries under the Belt and Road Initiative. But according to some information from our state-affiliated media, we do know that China has already forgiven some countries' debt. So whether China will forgive the debt of 24 African countries, actually, I'm not so sure. But I believe that if China's economy develops well, China will at least reduce the economic burden or the debt burden for those countries, but not completely, clear their burdens, clear the debt. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Soong. I hope China continues to, implement the pledge besides, talking about it. So that is definitely an issue. Just one correction. You mentioned that China is a developing country, but China has agreed to forego its status as a developing country under WTO. This is a very recent determination that came only a couple of days ago, and one of our audience members, Dr. Pusarla, is highlighting that. So just be aware that China has given up the status as a developing country under WTO. That was a point of contention between United States and China, because China, despite being the second largest economy, continued to exploit the developing country status. So China is no longer a developing country. At this point in time,
I do not agree with you. Sorry.
Yeah. At this point in time, we have amongst our audience former diplomat and a member of our International Advisory Board, Ambassador Kapoor. I want to bring Ambassador Kapoor for a very specific question. Professor Soong talked about, these new institutions actually complementing the existing institutions with a gradual reform of the existing institutions. They are not here to supplement them, they are to complement them. In that process, we did discuss the issue of United Nations Security Council reform. And the only country that is holding out is China. Although Professor Soong talked about, India and China being the two leading nations that will lead the emerging new economic global order in the global south. Do you see the contradictions here? And what would be your comments and suggestions for China?
It's a very difficult position for China because while they face the onslaught of the Western world and the US in terms of the strategic aspects, in terms of the economic aspects, in terms of the trade aspects, in terms of the military aspects, China is also trying to improve its relations with India. And recently we have seen quite a few measures which have been taken in that regard. India is quite comfortable to engage in a dialogue with China currently, but it is not going to be very substantive or long-lasting in the sense that, they will put aside some of the issues like the border problems in the back burner so that they can carry on the discussions. But China's support for India's aspirations to be a permanent member of the Security Council, China's support for terrorism in the UN, in the SCO, in all platforms, all steps to be taken against terrorism, those sort of issues are going to be continuously discussed. And hopefully there will be some change in the Chinese stance on these issues so that there can be a more sort of long-lasting, more substantive, more meaningful relationship between the two countries. Otherwise, it will continue to be a case of dialogue and discussions, but without any endpoint. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. There's a question for Professor Kondapalli from Dr. Rama Harita Pusarla. And I'll read that question. Professor Kondapalli, what according to you can be the parameters or issues that would be foundational pillars for the emerging world order?
Thank you very much for that question. I think what India is asking is not for the moon. What India is asking is very basic, mundane things in the international relations. India is suggesting that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the member states of the General Assembly be respected. We have seen, for example, in the recent conflict in May 2025, one nation promotes terrorism against India. Another nation supports with arms and other, United Nations Security Council 1267 committee records on these were changed. So what India is number one asking is the protection of the sovereignty and territorial integrity. And this is enshrined in the UN Charter. This is not, India is not asking for the moon. So that is one, I think, is very fundamental, building block, foundational pillar for the emerging world order. And this is a 1945 position which India wants to be kept intact and protected effectively. United Nations has failed in its duty in regard to that. So that is number one. Second, it is India is trying to say that some of the disruptions caused recently, those need to be addressed. Disruptions caused in terms of the economic situation of many of the developing countries. So, as I mentioned before, the COVID-related pandemic has created havoc. 6 million people were killed in the COVID-19, and WHO did not do its duty to protect the health of the world, the people of the world. And so this is a second aspect that the institutions need to work not for one nation, one country, but for all the countries concerned. And it has to, what they promised need to be kept in mind. The third is in the conflicts recently, we have seen the fuel, fertilizer, and food prices have increased. Of course, India is in a comfortable position as far as the food is concerned, and in fact had exported to whatever it can afford to the developing countries at lower prices, like it did on the vaccines. The virus did not originate in India, yet India provided for nearly 200 million doses of vaccine as part of Vaccine Maitri friendship at lower prices, etc., for many developing countries. So I think the second aspect is the economic well-being of the people. And so supply chain disruptions, these need to be addressed in terms of not the UN, of course, but in terms of the emerging order. The related aspect is the financial requirements. For instance, the debate on common but differentiated responsibilities on climate change, equal but differentiated responsibilities, and there is the announcements regarding the industrialized West would first roll back the emissions. Kyoto Protocol did mention that in the 90s. And then the Copenhagen, the Lima meeting, the Doha meeting, the Paris meeting, all reiterated these things. So what India is also asking in this emerging foundational pillar for the emerging is climate finance for the developing countries in terms of shift to the renewables, and this is a big issue for them. And also on the voting rights in IMF and World Bank, the small part of reorganization took place in 2010, but it has not really gone further. So that is what India is also trying to say.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Kondapalli. We are running short of time, so my heartfelt thanks to our distinguished panelists, Kamakshi Wason, Professor David Soong, Ambassador Gustavo Westmann, and Professor Srikanth Kondapalli. The take-home message from this roundtable discussion is that, yes, the emerging global order is very fluid at this point in time. There is a responsibility for international cooperation on part of all the global South countries. What one does not envisage is replacement of one hegemon by another hegemon, wherever that hegemon be located. And that's an important message that goes to everyone, that a newly emerging global order should be more about cooperation rather than turf building or empire building. We thank our audience members also who are, located at various places, took 1 hour of their Saturday time. Thank you very much indeed to everyone. And hopefully we shall come back again with a stimulating topic for next month's roundtable.